The harness was broken, and dragging upon the ground behind the horse were small portions of the wreck of the wagon. Poor Buck's flank was red with blood, and his legs showed all too plainly the marks of deadly conflict with a savage, hungry foe. The wreck of the wagon, the broken harness, and the wounds upon the horse told eloquently, as if spoken in words, the story of the night. Wolves had attacked Balser's father, and Buck had come home to give the alarm. Balser ran quickly to the fire pile upon the hill and kindled it for the purpose of calling help from the neighbors. Then he went back to the house and took down his gun. He tied a bundle of torches over his shoulder, lighted one, and started out in the blinding, freezing storm to help his father, if possible. He followed the tracks of the horse, which with the aid of his torch were easily discernible in the deep snow, and soon he was far into the forest, intent upon his mission of rescue. After the boy had traveled for an hour, he heard the howling of wolves and hastened in the direction whence the sound came, feeling in his heart that he would find his father surrounded by a ferocious pack. He hurried forward as rapidly as he could run, and his worst fears were realized. Soon he reached the top of a hill overlooking a narrow ravine which lay to the eastward. The moon had risen and the snow had ceased to fall. The wind was blowing a fiercer gale than ever, and had broken rifts in the black bank of snow cloud, so that gleams of the moon now and then enabled Balser's vision to penetrate the darkness. Upon looking down into the ravine, he beheld his father standing in the wagon, holding his hand a single tree which he used as a weapon of defense. The wolves jumped upon the wagon in twos and threes, and when beaten off by Mr. Brent would crowd around the wheels and howl to get their courage up and renew the attack. Mr. Brent saw the boy starting down the hill toward the wagon and motioned to him to go back. Balser quickly perceived that it would be worse than madness to go to his father. The wolves would at once turn their attack upon him, and his father would be compelled to abandon his advantageous position in the wagon and go to his relief, in which case both father and son would be lost. Should Balser fire into the pack of the wolves from where he stood, he would bring upon himself and his father the same disaster. He felt his helplessness grievously, but his quick wit came to his assistance. He looked about him for a tree which he could climb, and soon found one. At first he hesitated to make use of the tree, for it was dead and apparently rotten, but there was none other at hand. So he hastily climbed up and seated himself firmly upon a limb which seemed strong enough to sustain his weight. Balser was now safe from the wolves, and at a distance of not more than 20 yards from his father. There he waited until the clouds for a moment permitted the full light of the moon to rest upon the scene, and then he took deliberate aim and fired into the pack of howling wolves. A sharp yelp answered his shot, and then a black, seething mass of growling, fighting, snapping beasts fell upon the carcass of the wolf that Balser's shot had killed, and almost instantly they devoured their unfortunate companion. Balser felt that he could kill enough wolves to satisfy the hunger of the living ones. They would abandon their attack upon his father, for wolves, like cowardly men, are brave only in desperation. They will attack neither man nor animal except when driven to do so by hunger. After Balser had killed the wolf, clouds obscured the moon before he could make another shot. He feared to fire in the dark lest he might kill his father, so he waited impatiently for the light which did not come. Meanwhile, the dead wolf having been devoured, the pack again turned upon Mr. Brent, and Balser could hear his father's voice and the clanking of the iron upon the singletree as he struck at the wolves to ward them off. It seemed to Balser that the moon had gone under the clouds, never to appear again. Mr. Brent continually called loudly to the wolves, for the human voice is an awesome sound even to the fiercest animal. To Balser, the tone of his father's voice, mingled with the howling of wolves, was a note of desperation that almost drove him frantic. The wind increased in fury every moment, and Balser felt the cold piercing to the marrow of his bones. He had waited, it seemed, to him hours, for the light of the moon again to shine, but the clouds appeared to grow deeper and the darkness more dense. While Balser was vainly endeavoring to watch the conflict at the wagon, he heard a noise at the root of the tree in which he had taken refuge, and looking down he discovered a black monster standing quietly beneath him. It was a bear that had been attracted to the scene of battle by the noise. Balser at once thought, "Could I kill this huge bear? His great carcass certainly would satisfy the hunger of the wolves that surround my father." Accordingly, he lowered the point of his gun, and taking as good aim as the darkness would permit, he fired upon the bear. The bear gave forth a frightful growl of rage and pain, and as it did so its companion, a beast of enormous size, came running up, apparently for the purpose of rendering assistance. Balser hastily reloaded his gun and prepared to shoot the other bear. This he soon did, and while the wolves howled about his father, the two wounded bears at the foot of the tree made night hideous with their ravings. Such a frightful bedlam of noises had never before been heard. Balser was again loading his gun, hoping to finish the bears, when he saw two lighted torches approaching along the path over which he had just come, and as they came into view, imagine his consternation when he recognized the forms of Lenny Fox and her brother Tom. Tom carried his father's gun, for Mr. Fox had gone to Brookville, and Lenny, in addition to her torch, carried Tom's hatchet. Lenny and Tom were approaching rapidly, and Balser called out to them to stop. They did not hear him, or did not heed him, but continued to go forward to their death. The bears at the foot of the tree were wounded, and would be more dangerous than even the pack of wolves howling at the wagon. "Go back! Go back!" cried Balser desperately, "or you'll be killed! 2 wounded bears are at the root of the tree I'm in, and 100 wolves are howling in the hollow just below me. Run for your lives! Run! You'll be torn in pieces if you come here." The boy and girl did not stop, but continued to walk rapidly toward the spot from which they had heard Balser call. The clouds had drifted away from the moon, and now that the light was of little use to Balser, for he was intent upon saving Lenny and Tom, there was plenty of it. The sound of his voice and the growling of the bears had attracted the attention of the wolves. They were wavering in their attack upon Mr. Brent, and evidently had half a notion to fall upon the bears that Balser had wounded. Meantime, Lenny and Tom continued to approach, and their torches, which under ordinary circumstances would have frightened the animals away, attracted the attention of the bears and the wolves, and drew the beasts upon them. They were now within a few yards of certain death. And again Balser in agony cried out, "Go back, Lenny! Go back! Run for your lives!" In his eagerness he rose to his feet and took a step or two out upon the rotten limb on which he had been seated. As he called to Lenny and Tom, and motioned to them frantically to go back, the limb upon which he was standing broke, and it fell a distance of 10 or 12 feet to the ground, and lay half stunned between the 2 wounded bears. Just as Balser fell, Lenny and Tom came up to the rotten tree, and at the same time the pack of wolves abandoned their attack upon Mr. Brent, and rushed like a herd of howling demons upon the 3 helpless children. One of the bears immediately seized Balser, and the other one struck Lenny to the ground. By the light of the torches, Mr. Brent saw all that had happened, and when the wolves abandoned their attack upon him, he hurried forward to rescue Balser, Lenny, and Tom, although in doing so he was going to meet his death. In a few seconds Mr. Brent was in the midst of a terrible fight, and a dozen wolves sprang upon him. Tom's gun was useless, so he snatched the hatchet from Lenny, who was lying prostrate under one of the bears, and tried to rescue her from its jaws. Had he done so, however, it would have been only to save her for the wolves. But his attempt to rescue Lenny was quickly brought to an end. The wolves sprang upon Tom, and soon he too was upon the ground. The resinous torches which had fallen from the hands of Tom and Lenny continued to burn and cast a lurid light upon the terrible scene. Consciousness soon returned to Balser, and he saw with horror the fate that was in store for his father, his friends, and himself. Despair took possession of his soul, and he knew that the lamp of life would soon be black in all of them forever. While his father and Tom lay upon the ground at the mercy of the wolves, and while Lenny was lying within arm's reach of him in the jaws of the wounded bear, and he utterly helpless to save the girl of whom he was so fond, Balser's mother shook him by the shoulder and said, "Balser, your father's coming." Balser sprang to his feet, looked dazed for a moment, and then ran, half weeping, half laughing, into his father's arms, just as the sleepy little clock had finished striking 9.